My name is John Dominic Crossan. I'm a professor emeritus of religious studies at DePaul University, Chicago, Illinois. This is my academic autobiography, and it's the third part. The time is from 1951 to 1969. As usual, I put the time frame up in the top right hand corner, so we'll be talking about 1951 to 1957. But I begin with a sort of a recap from the preceding second part of my academic autobiography. As you recall, in 1951, in September of 1951, I had finished a year at Benburb Priory in County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. I had been a friar inside Benburb Priory, and probably in August actually of 51, we were told that since, as I mentioned before, we had started as 12 and there was only 3 of us now, rather than bring teachers over from the States for our 6 years of theology and philosophy, they were going to send us over to the States to join a class already actually in session at a place called Stonebridge Priory, another Servite Priory, but this time outside Chicago, north of Chicago, at Lake Bluff near Lake Forest. So the big question was, how fast could they get us home for a week's vacation, as we saw at the end of the last part 2 of the autobiography, and get us then across the Atlantic fast and on to Chicago to join the class in session as soon as possible. I begin with a preparatory footnote. This is the Royal Mail steamer Queen Mary, and the picture is taken on the 20th of June 1945. The great liner is steaming into the Hudson. You can see the Cunard docks are behind her. New Jersey is where we're looking from, as it were. And during the war, and she is still in her war battle grey, the Queen Mary was not used as a luxury liner but as a troop transport, and she's coming in actually now with 15,000 troops returning home from Europe after the European war is over, of course, and maybe 1,000 of a crew, so she's about 16,000 people on. And what had happened was, during the war, using the Queen as a transport, obviously she was too fast to keep up with the convoy. She about maybe 31 knots an hour, so she went by herself. She zigzagged every couple of minutes so that a German submarine would not get a chance to get a sighting on her and line up the torpedo before she zigzagged again. So it obviously was never sunk during the war, but it carried 16,000 people, 15,000 of a crew, 15,000 of transport soldiers, of troops, and 1,000 of a crew. Normally, as a luxury liner, she could carry about 2,000 passengers and 1,000 of a crew, round number. The Queen Mary was bigger than the Titanic, of course. So now she is finishing her experience, as it were, as a troop transport. She's going to be refitted and recolored as a luxury liner, and 6 years later, when my religious superiors call up the Cunard line and say we need to get 3 people across the Atlantic as fast as possible, what do you have? The Cunard line replied, well, we have 3 berths available, second class on the Queen Mary. Second class is also called cabin class or tourist class. So immediately after our week's vacation, we came back to Benburb, went up to Belfast, across to Liverpool, down to London, on to Southampton, got on the Queen Mary and set out across the Channel to Cherbourg to pick up French and I suppose mostly French passengers there, then out across the Atlantic. Unfortunately, this is the only picture I have of the three of us. Tom Burke, you can see to the left. We've spread out so you can see the lifebelts from the Queen Mary. And then Columba MacDonald and myself. So we've left Southampton on the 27th of September, crossed over the Channel to pick up French passengers, or at least passengers in Cherbourg, France, and then on across the Atlantic to arrive in New York on the 4th of October 1951. And if you know baseball, you know the 4th of October 1951 was quite a big day in New York because it was going to be a Subway Series. The New York Yankees and the New York Giants were going to play a series. I think it was about 6 games in all, but this was the opening one on the 4th of October. And you know who won it? The Yankees did, of course. So 4th of October 1951, like that preceding picture, we were steaming past the Statue of Liberty. We came in just about as the Statue of Liberty was ready to put out its torch, pulled into the Cunard dock in the Hudson. This photograph, of course, is taken again from the web. It shows the manifest of inbound passengers that morning of the 4th of October. We're actually called aliens. We're kind of like from another planet. We're not even immigrants or visitors. We're aliens. So you can see the dates. We're cabin class, second class. Southampton, 27th of September. New York, the 4th of October. But the interesting question is, well, 2 questions. First of all, why didn't we stop at Ellis Island? Ellis Island was still open in 1951. Because the Cunard luxury liners, and I suppose most of the other major luxury liners, first and second classes came straight in to the docks and were disembarked on the docks in the New York Harbor itself. Third class passengers were then put on a boat taken back to Ellis Island. So I was rather disappointed. You know, I did enjoy second class coming over, certainly. It was nicer than third class, but I would have liked to have seen Ellis Island. We'd heard so much about it. It was going to close very soon. I would have loved to have experienced it, but that's me again with adventure. The big other question is this: how come the three of us get off first? How come we clear immigration, customs and immigration before everybody else, in the second class at least? Because a Servite priest from our parish in New Jersey was sent over to get us safely off the ship and get us over to Penn Station for the train to Chicago, and thence, as you can see there, to Stonebridge Priory, Lake Bluff, Illinois, which is the Servite Priory, north of Chicago near Lake Forest. Okay, what he was thinking about when he thought about 3 p.m. that 4th of October was not, I have to get these guys over safely to the train for Chicago, but I have to get to Yankee Stadium at 3 p.m. for the opening of the first game in the World Series. So he came down immediately as soon as we docked to the Queen Mary, got an official, Customs and Immigration, who came down, 2 of them, to our cabin and cleared us of Customs and Immigration in the cabin. So we got off early, got over to Penn Station, and spent, 4 or 5 hours there waiting for the train. But our guardian angel made it safely back to the first game of the World Series. It's ironic that I've spent my novitiate in a religious order in a beautiful mansion in Bamburgh, and now I'm going to spend the next 6 years, 2 years of philosophy and 4 years of theology, training to become a priest in another beautiful mansion called Stonebridge. If you look down at that picture on the bottom, You can see the entrance with the S on it. The road going in is to a mansion. Well, it's really 12-acre estate, and a lake in front of the mansion, a lake in the back of the mansion, and there's a stone bridge going over the lake, hence the rather obvious name. And I'm grateful, by the way, for these photographs from the Lake Bluff History Museum, all of them. The estate was originally the Kelly estate from 1916. He was a railroad engineer who had many inventions for the railroads. For example, solving the difficulty of how do you have a swaying carriage that won't have a roof that leaks, for example, or how do you get two carriages to merge and link together and hold together easily. Anyway, 1916 he built this magnificent estate, and 1916 was before federal income taxes, so it was serious money. Eventually it passed to the Murphy estate. I don't know the date there, and when Murphy died in 1942, he gave it as a donation to Northwestern University, both the building, the estate, the whole 12-acre estate, and about $6 or $7 million. Northwestern took the money but really had no use for the house too far away from its Evanston campus, and after a polite 3 years they sold it to the Servites and became Stonebridge Priory. What was happening really was these great estates could not really be sustained by too many private individuals because of taxes, and could only be taken over either by an educational, tax-free institution like Northwestern, or an ecclesiastical, tax-free institution like the Servites. So by 1945, when I arrived there to meet, the three of us arrived there actually, to meet the rest of our classmates for the first class, it was this magnificent estate. You can see down in the left-hand corner what it looks like, the entranceway, and over on the right-hand corner is the area which was, when it was an estate, the places where the chauffeurs and the grounds people, well, there were groundsmen, I'm pretty certain, lived, and the cars were kept. And that big tall building was not a clock tower, but where it was an ice house, where the ice taken from the two lakes in the winter, stored for the summer, was kept. So 6 years I'm going to be at Stonebridge Priory, of course away from my home in Ireland. And you know, to be very honest with you, I was never homesick. This was, I'm sorry again, a great adventure. I never thought of it as giving up my life for anything. I thought of it as a great adventure, and I was deep into it and fully involved in it. Once again, and unfortunately, I don't have too many pictures. I just have two from those years. The one is in 1954. I'm seated on the back of that monastic on the balustrade behind, immediately behind the mansion itself. And the other one is 1957, just before I was ordained a priest. I was ordained a priest in the Servite order in May of 1957. And by the way, you'll notice I don't have glasses on even in 1957. But yeah, they're coming. They'll be there by 58. They were coming. As you can see there, the next chunk of time is 1957 to 1959. After I was ordained, my religious superiors had to decide what to do with me next, as it were, and they had decided that this was a priest who had 5 years of Greek and 5 years of Latin, which was not exactly customary with students in the States. So they decided, of course, to send me on to become a professor. Next question was where? And since so many Irish students had been leaving Ireland to join the Servites through Benburb Priory, they decided it would be courteous and polite to send the first Servite who was getting a doctorate back to Maynooth. Now, a couple of words about Maynooth. Again, another magnificent aerial picture of it as it is today. it began life as the Royal College of St. Patrick in 1795 because Royal, notice, it was funded by the British Empire, not quite the size it is today, of course. But the problem was that Irish students, to become priests, were going off to Europe and learning things about that horrible thing called the French Revolution, and were importing them back into Ireland. So wouldn't it be prudent to spend the money to create a seminary in Ireland for Irish students to become priests and not go abroad and get bad influence from the French Revolution? So it's the Royal College of St. Patrick, funded by the British Empire. There's some cutlery still around that has RC on it, and people usually think, well, that's Roman Catholic. No, it's Royal College. Later it became St. Patrick's Pontifical University. You could get degrees through the Vatican, 1896. Today, the last time we were there, it's Maynooth University. It's co-ed, of course, now. Maynooth University, here and across the road, actually, as part of the National University of Ireland, which is located in various towns and places in Ireland. The National University is a kind of an umbrella name, Maynooth University. So that's where I was going to spend the next 2 years in order to get a doctorate in theology. I put up this slide for two reasons. That's not my graduation gown there. That's a picture much later. I never graduated from anything. I just finished exams, passed them, and left. So this is a picture taken much later when I got an honorary doctorate, actually. Now, I put up my diploma, not to boast, but to face reality. I did get a doctorate in sacred theology. It's in Latin, as you can see. I would much prefer to call that a DST, but it's usually called an STD, which is an unfortunate set of letters. In any case, if you can read the small print, I didn't do very well. Oh, I think the thesis was fine. It was on the image of God in Philo and St. Paul. That wasn't the problem. The problem was the defense. It was a bad defense. I'm grateful that the whole doctorate didn't depend on it. The reason it was bad was I had to speak Latin. Now, I was at home with Latin. I'd had, as you well know, 5 years in the high school. I'd been praying in Latin for what, 6 years? Every day the chant, the Gregorian chant was in Latin. I was at home in reading Latin, understanding Latin. I was not at home in speaking it. I'd never done it. It was a dead language, so you could read it, but you couldn't speak it. For example, the outside examiner spoke fluent Ciceronian Latin, which I might have been able to read all right, taking time. Certainly not to understand at the speed he was speaking. So I did what politicians do. No matter what question I was asked, I said the same thing pretty much in different words. I just said my thesis. What I really learned, though, is if you force people to speak, I'm talking about speak, a dead language, it controls their mind. There's no way when you're trying to think a dead language that you're really being creative. No, you're not. You're just so glad to know the language. And in fact, if you're asked a question, you're liable to repeat it as much as possible in the same language. Anyway, I got my doctorate, so the next question from my religious superiors, what comes next? And I'm not saying as a complaint that I had no say in this matter, because they were doing a magnificent job in deciding where I was going to be educated. I couldn't have done better myself. So now time and place changes. We're now in 1959 to 61. My religious superiors have decided to send me for a postdoctoral diploma for what's called a license in sacred scripture. I could focus on exegesis, and the license, it's probably the same as an MA, but it's a postdoctoral MA in specialization. They sent me to the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. It's Piazza della Polata, just in from the Corso, and down a side street from Trevi Fountain, so it's right in the heart of Rome. And I was going to be there for 2 years. And I want to talk about my professors. They were great professors. I had 3 New Testament professors. 2 of them, Maximilian Zerwig, who was German, and Stanislas Lyonnais, who was French, taught respectively Gospels and Paul. And when I graduated in 61, those 2 professors were forbidden by the Vatican to teach at the Biblical Institute in 61 to 62, although they were reinstated, honorably of course, and justly, by the Second Vatican Council. So biblical studies was what I call a minefield. There was all mines and no field. You had to be very careful what you said, where you said it, and how loudly you said it. The 3rd major professor, New Testament professor, was Father Augustine Bea, and he had been from 1930 to 59, also some years as rector. He had been a professor at the Pontifical Biblical Institute. We called it the Biblicum for short. He was going to be, in ways I was just only beginning to appreciate, a powerful influence on my life. I'll tell you about that influence looking at this picture. I didn't have it, I didn't retain it from the time. I sent it home to my parents, and my nephew, Paul Kyogan, discovered it within the last couple of weeks and sent it to me just in time to be used here. You can make me out. I'm in the 2nd row with the heavy glasses, and right in front of that, probably Dominican priest in white. What's going on? On the 14th of December in 1959, so I was just there probably about 2 months, and the early morning class, I think it was 9 o'clock, was always taught by Augustine Bea. I think it was Introduction to the New Testament. On that date, he had been declared to be a cardinal by Pope John the 23rd in an official consistory. So I'm not sure if it was that day or the day afterwards, but an official photographer came in to take a picture of Augustine Cardinal Bea's class, because he continued out the semester, continued to finish his class. You could tell something's going on because you could see the priest to the right standing there observing, because the photographers are taking mostly pictures, of course, of Cardinal Bea. I'm more interested in sending this one home because I'm in it. I don't have a single one of Cardinal Bea. But why was he important? Why was he made a cardinal? Same thing. He was the Pope's point man at the forthcoming Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965. He was in charge of, I'm going to say, reconciling Roman Catholicism and Judaism, which especially in its liturgy, especially at Passion time in Good Friday, very often Roman Catholic anti-Judaism, let me be fair, biblical anti-Judaism, as used by Roman Catholicism in its liturgies for Holy Week, created huge problems for Jews. If on Good Friday Roman Catholics went to a liturgy that said the Jews killed Jesus, the Jews killed our Jesus, they might go out and riot and desecrate a synagogue or even hurt or kill Jews. So the question was, what was the relation, the surface question, between Roman Catholicism and Judaism? But for myself as a scholar, I was also asking a deeper question. What was the relation in the biblical tradition, in the Gospels, between Jews and what later would be known as Christians? So I sent that picture home, explained it there. I tell you what you already know. John the 23rd, he made Father Bea a cardinal consistory of 14th of December 59. I sent the photographs home and I wrote in my already degenerating handwriting, Cardinal Bea's class at the Biblical Institute, Rome, December 59, after it was announced that he had been created cardinal. It's kind of an historical photo, actually. You can see who took it, Francesco Reale Company from the Corso Vittorio Emanuele in Rome. So I have three of them, actually, but this was the clearest one. And it explains very clearly why that day was so important for me. It was my first time I was really conscious, honestly, conscious about Judaism and Christianity. And especially it was coming across to me, even then already, because I was studying the Bible. Well, what about the biblical tradition? It's not just what Roman Catholics say in their liturgy on Good Friday. I'm reading what the New Testament says about the execution of Jesus. The influence of Cardinal Bea in 1959 was accompanied, like two sides of the same coin, by an influence from Oberammergau in 1960. And that takes some background. You may know this, but in 1633, the villagers of this tiny little hamlet, shall I say, at the foothills of the Bavarian Alps, Oberammergau, as it was called, vowed to perform a passion play every 10 years for protection from bubonic plague. And fulfillment has continued with ones every decennials and anniversaries since 1634. How did I get involved? Well, it's a good story all by itself. I was in Rome, as you know, in 1960, and actually in the summer of 1960, apart from the heat of a Roman summer, there was also all the construction for the impending Olympic Games. So I was very happy to get a letter from my religious superiors in the States saying that they were sending 30 to 40 American pilgrims on a pilgrimage around various Roman Catholic shrines in Europe, and rather than, well, bluntly, paying for a priest to go as their chaplain on a transatlantic fare, I was to go from Rome to Lisbon, become the chaplains for this group, and take them from, say, Fatima, Portugal, Lisbon and Lisieux in France, on to Rome, and then, since it was 1960, to Oberammergau, and then all the way by bus to Paris, where they were departing. And I was very happy to get this instruction. So, in 1960, I first saw the Passion Play at Oberammergau with my pilgrims on September the 15th of 1960. Oh, I should say one thing, by the way. When they got to Rome on their itinerary, it said they were going to have an audience with the Pope, a public audience, like the Pope has every week. And I knew when I first read that, when I met them in Lisbon, oh no, they are not going to have an audience with the Pope, because the Pope spends his August up in Castel Gandolfo in the Alban Hills and Castelli Romani, which is the sensible thing to do to get away from the Roman heat. So I was wondering all the way to Rome, what am I going to do? This is supposed to be the highlight of their tour. And when I got there, I talked to some of my friends, what can I do? They said, you are in luck. Tomorrow morning is Sunday, and he's coming out from the Papal Palace, and he's going to say, very privately, no fanfare, the 8 o'clock Mass in the parish church of Castel Gandolfo. Get your people out there. So we were going to have a bus from Rome all the way to Paris. I got it early, and 8 o'clock that Sunday morning, I had my 30 to 40 people in the front rows. Yeah, look, there was about 6 other people in the church, to be honest. In the front rows, they had Mass with the Pope. They had communion from the Pope. Since the papal photographer is always there, they had pictures of themselves with the Pope, and they thought I was God Almighty. I let it kind of float in the air whether this was my influence or anything else. But, sorry, that's an aside story. Let me get on to Oberammergau. Oberammergau. Now, here's what actually happened to me. I was there at 9 o'clock in the morning, of course, for the start. It was almost 8 hours, I think, with a break for lunch. So, first thing in the morning, we are at what we call Palm Sunday. The stage is filled, and it's a huge stage. Women and children primarily, because most of the men are otherwise occupied. But in any case, the stage was filled with the crowd shouting, "For Jesus! Hosanna! Hosanna! For Jesus!" Okay? Now, by the way, I did know the story. I did know how the story ended, but I had always read it as text. I am now seeing it, for the first time in my experience, as drama. So, we spend the morning there, and then maybe after 3 or 4 hours, we have a 2-hour break for lunch. Then we come back again for another 3 or 4 hours, say something like 2 o'clock, let's say, 3 o'clock. And all of a sudden, the same crowd, and it is the same crowd because you recognize the children that were in the crowd, they're all shouting against Jesus. Crucify him, crucify him. And I thought, for the first time, even though I knew the story, when I saw it as drama, this makes no sense. What happened, as it were, when we were at lunch? How did the crowd change? Every one of them change from for Jesus at 6 o'clock in the morning, at 9 o'clock in the morning, to against Jesus by 3 or 4 in the afternoon. That's when I saw it for the first time. So, along with Bea, it meant for me that I have a huge question. How does this story actually work? What happens to the crowd? What's the history behind this theology? Now, to get back to 1960, I was seeing it in the same traditional version that Adolf Hitler saw in 1930, that was before he became Chancellor, and for the tricentennial in 1934 after he became Chancellor. And by the way, as a footnote, in the 1934 version, which Hitler had fully attended, all 6 to 8 hours, Jesus and Mary were card-carrying Nazi members. Only Judas, Judas at least, ironically, was anti-Nazi, refused to come up on the stage and shake Hitler's hand at the end of the performance. But in any case, let me focus for a moment on Hitler. I want to hold Cardinal Bea and Oberammergau as two sides of the same coin for me, because as I said before, it was striking me as a biblical scholar, not just as something Roman Catholicism and Judaism. I was focusing on the biblical text itself. Was the problem in the biblical text? So, for example, Hitler, as I said, was there in 1934. I went on the web and found this picture of Monday, August the 13th of 1934. Hitler is arriving in his Mercedes, and he's mobbed by enthusiastic people. He's right in front of the main hotel. You can see above his head. And he went and saw the entire Passion Play in 1934. This is an official picture taken in the illustrated journal called the Illustrated Observer. You notice it's the 9th year, so it was started way back in the 20s, and it's dated to the 25th of August 1934. So Hitler attended that day the full play. And here from rather later is his obscene review for that play. The picture of him there is taken at the Berghof in Obersalzberg in 36. It's now in the museum at Munich. And he was talking the evening of July the 5th in 1942. and recorded by others. Here's what he said. I've just taken the hardcore of what he said, and I leave it without comment. At Oberammergau, one sees in Pontius Pilate a Roman, racially and intellectually so superior that he stands out like a firm, clean rock in the middle of the whole muck and mire of Jewry. So much for Hitler. That's the way the problem was coming across to me. What about the New Testament? The question I was asking myself from the very first scholarly article I wrote, that's just a copy of the opening of it. It's in Theological Studies for 1965, the Jesuit journal in America. My title, Anti-Semitism and the Gospel. I'm really asking, did, maybe it'd be better to call it, anti-Judaism in the Gospel, was it the seedbed for racial anti-Semitism in Europe especially? And if so, what were we to do with it? And my solution, by the way, was not, well, let's not say it anymore, as if we know it's true but we won't mention it. No, the solution to anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism was good history. That was the solution. If you get your history right, you'll get your theology right, unless you're perverse and want your theology to be wrong in any case, or to be anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. That's what I was thinking in 65, and my most recent book, okay, excuse an advertisement, 2024 is the date, called Paul the Pharisee. Again, it's not just Paul the Jew, but Paul, that very special type of Jew called a Pharisee in the first century. So, Bea and Oberammergau came powerfully together for me to form something which has been the substratum, in a way, of all my work, all my lectures, all my classes. Whether I'm talking about Jesus or Paul, I'm watching very carefully to be historically accurate so I don't create false theology. Already, once again, the time changes and so does the place. From 1961 to 1965, after I returned from Rome, I had come, as you remember, you recognize the same pictures, to Stonebridge Priory as a student in 51. I'm now coming back in 61 as a professor. So for the next 4 years, I'm going to be teaching those taking their 4 years of theology. And here's what was magnificent for me. I had taken lots of courses on this or that in the Bible. But for those 4 years, I could take a group of students through the entire Bible from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation, as a unity. Don't make a big fuss about Old Testament, New Testament. Look at the whole sweep of the story in there. And it was thrilling to do that, because very often, say with Stanislas Lyonnais, I had studied Paul, but we concentrated really on one word in one sentence in one chapter of one epistle. He had spent talking about Echo, whether it meant that we had all sinned in Adam or simply had received bad example from Adam. So this was my great opportunity, slowly, methodically, and with a whole class who remained the same, to go through the whole Bible and to think what most of us scholars don't do about the Bible as a whole. We're all slotted into Old Testament or New Testament, whether we emphasize, say, Hebrew and Aramaic or maybe Greek and Latin. I wanted to look and had to teach the entire Bible, and my vision has never changed from that, to think of any part as part within the whole Bible. Once again, time and place changes. We're now in 65 to 67. What happened was I'd been teaching, as you remember, at Stonebridge Priory, but my own teacher had come back from teaching elsewhere. This is Father Neil Flanagan, and he was going to be teaching at Stonebridge, so I was free, and my religious superiors gave me the choice of taking a 2-year sabbatical, which I said yes, and I wanted to take it where else but in Jerusalem. I suppose I could have studied anywhere, but I wanted to study in Jerusalem. So I went to what is called the École Biblique et Archéologique Française in Jerusalem, which was founded there in 1890. It's the French Archaeological and Biblical School, and it's French because it's run by the French Dominicans. It is outside, just outside. Well, let me back up a bit. First of all, we're in Jordan. Remember, I'm going there in 1965 to 67. We're in Jordan. We're not in Israel. We're just outside the Damascus gate of the old city, but we are not in Jerusalem, Israel. We're in Jerusalem, Jordan. And in fact, we're halfway between the Damascus gate and what we talk about in a minute, the Mandelbaum gate on the main road north, the Nablus Road. The school is part of the Basilica of St. Stephen and part of the Dominican. Their initials are OP, as ours are OSM. They're the Order of Preachers. And that picture was taken before I got there in 1950. I chose it off the web. Again, I don't have too many pictures, unfortunately, but I chose it off the web because it shows a Dominican. And I've always felt that it was founded there by a great scholar called Father Lagrange in 1890. And part of it was, remember those fraught years of the biblical studies at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th? Well, Jerusalem was far away from Rome, and maybe you could say things in Jerusalem and back it by archaeology. So say things that were historically, geographically, and archaeologically true in Jerusalem and not get in trouble with Rome. So I think from the beginning there was a slight far away is safer. Here, unfortunately, is, well, it's a great picture, but it's the only one I have from the 2 years I spent, 65 to 67, in Jerusalem, Jordan. On the left-hand side, you can see the consulate of, they give the full title, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. That's my permissions to come in there and to remain for 2 journeys, 2 years. And it's cancelled, not by them, it's just cancelled because I had to get a new passport. After 2 years in the Middle East, my passport was completely filled and overstamped. Look at the picture. I'm standing on the earthquake shock of 31 BCE. The date is October 1965. I've just got there. I'd be there maybe 2 months or so. You can see how the earthquake has ripped apart the steps. This is a giant purification bath, and those steps were originally continuously, of course, and it's ripped them apart. I'm standing looking rather Mephistophelian with that beard and moustache. I'm wearing a keffiyeh, which is quite good against the desert because it picks up any wind there is at all and cools your face. My shoes, though it doesn't show, are more like football boots because I made the mistake of getting them wet in the Dead Sea, and that's not wise because the salt hardens them almost like tough leather. Anyway, I'm at the Essene Monastery in Qumran, there in Jordan, and this is their great purification bath. Look at the dates now. It's 65 to 67. Some history. The 6-Day War between Israel and the 4 contiguous states, that would be Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, is going to break out on June the 5th. It's called the 6-Day War, but in one way it was almost over on that first Monday morning because the Egyptian Air Force was destroyed on the tarmac on its base, and therefore the Syrian tanks had no air power protection. But in any case, the 6-Day War, and we've been told by our consulates, our embassies, and by our friends in the United Nations who had taken their dependents out to the Galilee into Cyprus a few days before, we knew, okay, it's coming. It was not prescience, we were warned. If you stay, you're going to stay. So the morning of Sunday, June the 4th, I ran. That's the technical term. I took my briefcase, everything else was left behind, books and everything else, to be sent on later or to see what happened, and took a taxi from in front of the École Biblique down the famous Jerusalem to Jericho road, like where the Good Samaritan had gone, crossed the Jordan Bridge because we figured that that was the first thing to go when war broke out, to Amman, and flew out from Amman to Rome. Everything else followed me years later. No, sorry, months later, I should say, months later. But that was the end of my 2 years there. All right, what did I get to do when I was there? This is what's called the Mandelbaum Gate. The reason for that term is that it was adjacent to the house of a Mr. Mandelbaum. That's the only reason for it. It's not much of a gate as gates go. But it is the official only Jordan-Israel crossing. And this picture was taken in November of '64. Obviously, I got there in 60. What did I get there? 65, yeah, 65. So the year later. But how is it possible, if I was living in Jordan, to ever visit Israel? Because the rule was these two countries were not at war technically, but they weren't at peace either, so there was no telephone communications between them. You see that white jeep is a UN jeep, so the UN was observing the green line between them to keep them from fighting with one another. So how did I get across? Well, an ordinary tourist could only go in one direction, Jordan into Israel and on, Israel into Jordan and on. You could not do a double crossing. And there was something else you also had to be very careful about, but I'll get to that in a minute. Here's how you had to to be able to visit Israel. You went down to the Franciscan Priory in Jerusalem, Jordan, and they called the Franciscan Priory in Cyprus, who called the Franciscan Priory in Jerusalem, Israel. And they had to give a very precise notification. Father Crossan wishes to cross over Jordan into Israel at 9 a.m. on November the whatever, in whatever year, and to return, say a week, 2 weeks later, at again a precise time and date. No, it had to be that way. And needless to tell you, I'm not taking that photograph. You did not pop up the Mandelbaum Gate with a camera and take a photograph unless you want to get shot. It's only a question of which side might shoot you. That's from the web, of course. It's an historic photograph from the web. But that's how I got over regularly to visit Israel while I was in Jordan. There was a second thing you really had to remember very clearly. If you made the mistake of getting an Israeli stamp on your passport, you would not be allowed in to Syria or Iraq for sure, and Egypt might even give you trouble. So everyone had to be very careful where they got their visas. I was still an Irish citizen, so here's the way Ireland handled the problem. It gave you, if you were in this situation and needed to do it, 2 separate passports. Now normally you don't get 2 passports legitimately. 2 passports. One of them said, you can see my one to the left, it said in Gaelic and in English, valid for travel to Israel, meaning travel to Israel only. Don't get your stamps anywhere else except on this passport. So you can see on the other side, the scan, my Israeli stamps, Israel Jerusalem, which tells everyone where I've crossed, of course, and they are the rectangular ones for entry and the triangular ones for exit. So, and there's more on other pages. So I was able to cross backwards and forwards as long as I set it up, a few weeks ahead. Couldn't just decide in the morning. And also to keep the Israeli passport in my left pocket and the rest of the world passport in my right pocket, and never the twain should meet, and never the twain did. So I had no problems whatsoever with passport. But I was still an Irish citizen. Can I say a word about that? And it's political. I came over to this country in '51 on a student visa. I went back, as you know, in 57, did 4 years to become a professor. When I came back in 61, I came back on a green card, no problem. And I intended, quite frankly, to remain on a green card. I was quite happy to be an Irish citizen the rest of my life. I had to be in this country because I couldn't do what I was doing in biblical studies in Ireland. So I loved being Irish, living in America. I was quite happy. What happened was in 1997, Newt Gingrich drew up what he called his contract with America, the Republican contract with America. I'm sorry that I consider it the Republican contract on America. But when it happened in 97, I said to Sarah, this country scares me. Something is happening. I don't understand it, but there's a terrible change. It's not safe for me to be, for anyone, to be in this country on a green card. You better be a citizen. So I immediately applied for citizen in 97, churned through the program, passed all my exams, personal interview, everything, and in the year 2000 I became a citizen. So these are all my Irish passports. I kept my Israeli stamps quite separate, and so as you can see with this rather marvelous visa from Iraq, I had no trouble traveling into Iraq. Generally speaking, in the summer, Christmas and Easter vacations, I kind of laid out a bit like Alexander the Great, the whole Middle East. What did I want to do? Where did I want to go? And I wanted to see everything. Now, I was not primarily interested in actually being a field archaeologist. I wanted history of archaeology. I wanted to see all the major sites for the Bible, not just for the New Testament. So, for example, I saw everything in Greece and Turkey, the main sites, the main archaeological sites. Greece and Turkey, Lebanon and Syria, Egypt and Tunisia, and threw in Morocco as a bonus, and especially Iraq and Iran. This is Iraq, and I love the visas you got from there because they were so colourful, but unfortunately people kept stamping on top of them again. The ones on the left, for example, are from Jordan, as is the one on top of it, I think, on the right. You could travel very, very easily in those days. I don't think it was just because I had an Irish passport. I think it was only after the Six-Day War that Americans started slowly but surely to have troubles traveling. When I was in Iraq, for example, you could start in Mosul in the north, come down to Baghdad and Babylon, come all the way down to Basra. In fact, Basra, rather than the horrible stories we've all seen on television in the last few years, I took a bus tour out of Basra to the Garden of Eden. I mean, it seemed the thing to do. There was a giant banner across the place where the Tigris and the Euphrates come together to form the Shat al-Arab to flow into the Persian Gulf. That was the Garden of Eden. So paradise was once in Basra. Or again, this is you can see Abadan. This is Iran, and under the Shah, of course. So you could go all the way from Tehran through down to Shiraz, Persepolis, the tomb of Cyrus, anything you wanted to see, all the way down to Abadan. You can see I exit from Abadan. And once again, Iran has a marvelous visa, lots of postage stamps. As usual, you see in the top right-hand corner the new dates, 1967 to 1969, and it's a change not only of time but of place. I've come back from my 2 years in the Middle East based in Jordan and pretty much got, as I mentioned, to see every major archaeological site in the Middle East, come back from Amman to Rome and on to Chicago. And Stonebridge Priory has been closed basically for lack of students. So for my first year back, 1967 to 1968, along with any of the Servite students who were left and my colleague professors, we were teaching or studying at Mundelein Seminary of the magnificent seminary of the Archdiocese of Chicago, therefore under the control, of course, of Cardinal Cody of Chicago, who to be polite, and that's why his picture is there, because he's going to be important in what follows, did not like anyone, anytime, any place, anywhere, anyhow, who stepped out of line. So that was 1967 to 68. The next year, 1968 to 69, three seminaries, also again, declining vocations. The Servites, whom I mentioned, and the Passionists and the Franciscans were forming a joint Catholic Theological Union at the University of Chicago. Not of the University of Chicago, but there in Hyde Park, so that students could attend both the seminary and, if they wanted, classes at the university. That's the situation. Now let me bring you to the 25th of July 1968, and the picture to the left of your screen of Pope Paul VI. On that date he issued the long-awaited papal encyclical on birth control for Roman Catholic couples, married couples. It's called, in Latin, Humanae Vitae, about human life, of human life. And basically it said that the only way that was not sinful for Roman Catholic couples to practice birth control was either total abstinence, which would certainly do it, or using the rhythm method of calculating ovulation and avoiding it if you were using it for birth control, the woman's ovulation. All right, put bluntly, a condom's a mortal sin for Roman Catholic couples. About a month later, almost towards the end of August of 68, I was in my office actually at Catholic Theological Union, which was going to start classes in probably about a month in September. I get a phone call. It's from the NPR TV station in Chicago, and they're asking would I be willing to come on Friday night and appear as a theological doctor with a medical doctor to debate and discuss the encyclical. And they told me that the doctor, whose name I cannot remember, but he was from Oak Park, as I recall, a suburb of Chicago, of course, Oak Park, his opinion, they said, was that he was going to argue that, whatever about abstinence, of course, rhythm actually worked. It really always worked. The biological logistics always worked unless, and this was, I thought, fantastically condescending, the woman had miscalculated the calendar, to put it bluntly. Anyway, would I come on? I said, of course I would, but I'm not going to debate the logistics, mechanics, or biologics of rhythm, but I will talk about the encyclical. So, yes, I came on, I said what I told them I was going to say, I think what they expected me to say. I said basically that the Pope was the Pope for Roman Catholics. We accepted him, we acknowledged him as our Pope, of course, but he was wrong about birth control. I said it was sort of analogous for Americans that Nixon was the president, accepted as the president, of course, but he was wrong about Vietnam. So a leader, even accepted, acknowledged, even respected maybe, could be wrong about a specific item. That's what I was going to say. That's what I said. And then I retired and waited for the firestorm, because I knew it was going to come. I had appeared, by the way, in lay clothes. I was not wearing a Roman Catholic collar, a black suit, appearing as a priest. I said, of course I'm a priest. You call me Father Crossan if you want to, but under my name on the screen, put theologian, Roman Catholic theologian if you want to. But I'm appearing as a theologian because basically I knew I was going to criticize the Pope, so I shouldn't do it as a priest, but as a theologian. That's what I said, that's what I did. That contentious interview on NPR TV was Friday, August the 23rd of 68. Look now at the short note I got from my immediate religious superior, my prior provincial. His nickname was Okie, that was what he used as well, but he was more politely the Very Reverend Terence M., of course, O'Connor, OSM, Prior Provincial of the Servites. He writes to me, as you can see, that Cardinal Cody, who is the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, that's why I put his picture up, and who didn't like anyone who stepped in any way out of line, wanted a complete report of my TV program. I had appeared, by the way, wearing a suit and tie. I didn't have a Roman collar on, because I said, I'm not denying I'm a priest. You can call me Father Crossan if you want, but under my name, I want written on the screen, theologian. John Dominic Crossan, Father, if you want to, theologian. I'm here, I'm appearing, I'm going to disagree with the Pope. I'm doing it as a theologian, not as a priest. In any case, that distinction was, shall we say, was lost on the Cardinal. He seemed more angry that I was wearing lay clothes than if I had been in a collar. In any case, Okie tells me he wants it by Thursday. I probably got this at the earliest on the 27th. And he asked me to come in and talk to him on the 28th. And when I did, Okie was very defensive of me. He said, look, what's the big deal? If he pushes you out of the diocese, you can go teach it at Rome or Louvain or somewhere much bigger than Chicago in terms of theological education. So don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. But he said, I need to explain to him what happened and about your future, where you want to go. And also, because we are just starting the first year of the Catholic Theological Union, and I was going to be just one, of their biblical scholars teaching, actually, a course on the parables. What would that do to that opening in September? In any case, Okie was not at all accusatory at all. It was very much defensive. And he then decided to write a letter, 4 pages, to the Cardinal rather than just go in and talk to him. And he sent me a copy of the 4 pages, which I still have, by the way. I haven't kept a lot of things, as you've seen, in terms of photographs, but these I kept because Okie went way, way out on a limb to defend me. Just 2 arguments. He said to the Cardinal that it says in the New Testament in Matthew, if you have a problem with a fellow Christian, you must talk first directly to that fellow Christian. So in effect, Your Eminence, you shouldn't be talking to me, but to Crossan. Oops, when I read that, I thought, oh dear, the 2 of us are going to be out of the diocese when this is over. Second argument, we have given the best education we know how to Father Crossan. He's had a doctorate in theology. He's had a 2-year specialization from Rome in exegesis, a 2-year specialization from Jerusalem in archaeology. If you find him inadequate, you are criticizing our teaching program. When I read that, I thought, Okie, you are a dear man, but you will be out of here even before me. And so we waited. The letter went in, and we waited for the other Episcopal shoe to drop. Nothing happened. September came, I went in and started my course, taught my course. What had happened, as best we can figure out, is that all of a sudden Crossan was a tiny little piece of sea spray on a tsunami. The laity was simply ignoring the encyclical. Scholarship was dismissing the encyclical. So Crossan wasn't anything big, a minor little flip, as it were, and the Cardinal Archbishop just dropped the whole thing. But I made my decision. Okay, I got away with that. I'm leaving. And if I try to explore my motivation, because that's honest to do, ever since the Second Vatican Council, many priests, including myself, had presumed that maybe the change would be the priest could marry. That had not happened. And by 69 we knew it wasn't going to happen. So yes, I did want to leave and get married, and that would have finished me as a priest and a monk and a member of a friar, actually. But there was another thing. If, when I was deciding to leave, the Vatican had decided, all right, you can remain a priest now and get married. I would have gone. I couldn't do it. I could not reconcile in conscience, or even in my sense of adventure, to be more blunt, the idea that I'm a critical scholar and an obedient priest, so whatever I find is going to be trimmed like trimming your sails to a Vatican wind. That if I wrote a book, I would have to submit it to see a censor, and it would get a stamp up front that it had been approved by the censor. How could I write a scholarly book for my colleagues in scholarship and admit to them that I'd submitted this book to censorship and may have changed it? Maybe I hadn't, but would be willing to change. That's not the way I did scholarship. That's not the way my magnificent training had trained me. So, okay, if I can't be an honest scholar and an obedient priest, I will no longer be an obedient priest. So, by January of that year, I applied for laicization by the book, laicization from my vows, and liberation to leave both the priory, my life as a friar, and my life as a priest. I conclude this third part of my bibliography, bringing it up to the year 1969. It's an appropriate end for my autobiography at this point, because it is the rescript from the Vatican that gives me the status of laicization, releases me from my vows, so I'm no longer a priest or a member of the religious order. And it comes from the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is also once called, which was at least once called, the Holy Office, and which is a direct descendant of the Inquisition. That was what the Holy Office was. That's where it started. In any case, I'm out from under it. I didn't get burned alive or burned badly in any way. I put it up there because if you look down at the very bottom in the Latin, you might see it's dated the 4th of July, 1969, which was, of course, Independence Day in the United States. So I've always wondered if somewhere in the bowels of the Vatican or deep in the depths of the Curia, there might be somebody with a sense of humor, because on the 4th of July, 1969, I got my full independence to be a critical scholar, and I was ready for the future.